and this is Theory of Limits, Part 2. We continue. We're talking about straightness. The verse says, show us the straight way, sirat, mustaqim, Fatiha, Surah al-Fatiha, verse 6. Also, say, verily my Lord has guided me to a way that is straight, sirat al-mustaqim, a religion of right, the path trod by Abraham, the true in faith, and he certainly joined not gods with God. Surah An'am, verse 161. Verily, this is my way, leading straight, sirati mustaqiman, follow it, follow not other paths, they will scatter you about from his great path. Thus does he command you, that you may be righteous. Surah An'am, verse 153. Also, and we guide them to the straight way, al-sirat al-mustaqim, Surah al-Safat, verse 118. We find in these verses the concept of straightness in the form of the adjective mustaqim. Both noun and adjective are derived from the Arabic root qawwamun, which the concept of straightness is derived from the root meaning of intasaba, and means to put something right that has straight. And the Qur'anic notion of Islam as the correct or true religion, ad-din al-qayyim, is also defined by the second meaning of azm, strength. Hence, the notion of straight also connotes the meaning of strong and mighty, qawi. This double meaning of putting straight and being strong, which already indicates the dialectical nature of straightness and curvature, the true strength of the Islamic religion, can be found in the following verses. Al-rijal are the protectors and maintainers, qawwamun, of al-nisa. Surah al-nisa, verse 34. Also, God, there is no God but He, the living, the self-subsisting, al-qayyum, eternal. Surah al-Baqara, verse 255. And now for curvature. As for the term curvature, this occurs in the book primarily in the form of the noun hanif, singular, or hunafa, plural, referring to A, to be those who are true in their faith, and B, to the religion the faithful adhere to. We hear from the book, being true in faith to God, hunafa lillah, and never assigning partners to him. Surah al-Hajj, verse 31. Who can better be in religion than one who submits his whole self to God, does good, and follow the way of Abraham, the true in faith, hanifan, for God did take Abraham for a friend. Surah An-Nisa, verse 125. Also, the other verses in Surah Rum 30 and Surah Bayyina, verse 5. However, etymologically, the noun hanif is derived from the Arabic root hanafa, ha nun fa, which means to drift or to bend, and almost always implies an aspect of incorrectness or distortion. If, for example, someone walks with a twisted ankle or a crippled foot or is bow-legged, one would use adjectives derived from hanafa, an example, ahnaf, in order to indicate a foot distortion. Furthermore, related root words such as hanafa or janafa, which only differ from hanafa by a different first radical, connote similar kinds of distortion or deviation. For example, hanafa is to speak with a nasal twang, while janafa indicates a distorted sense of justice or unbalanced judgment. In our reading of Surah Al-An'am, verse 79, the quality of being curved or bent, hanif, is a natural quality as it is intrinsic to human nature in the material objective world. The verse reads as follows: Lo, I have turned my face towards him who created Fatara, the heavens and the earth, as one by nature, hanifan, and I am not of the idolaters. Surah An'am, verse 79. The term hanif occurs here in the form of hal accusative, hanifan, and designates the state or quality of the act to which the previous subclause refer, that is, to God's creation of the heavens and the earth. This implies that nature has been created in a non-linear fashion, and that all things in the universe, from the smallest electrons to the biggest galaxies, move in curves. And since there is no natural straightness in God's creation, human beings in their innate natural disposition are also characterized by curvature and the lack of straightness. But in their curvedness, they are in total harmony with the material, objective reality around them, as this is marked by the same law of natural non-linearity. If the entire universe is characterized by curvature, nonlinear movement, and change, straightness will be necessary in order to implement some sort of equilibrium and constancy. Human beings need Allah as their guide to show them the straight path. Because of this necessity for controlling and restraining their natural inclination to constant permutations. Essentially, humans do not need God's guidance to follow their Hanifiya disposition. They instinctively bend towards nonlinearity and change. Hence, no verse in the book tells man how to see curvature. Instead, we hear, this is the natural disposition, Fitrat Allah, God instilled in humankind. There is no altering God's creation, and this is the right religion. Surah Rum, verse 30. And thus, we hear instead, show us the straight way. Surah Fatiha, verse 6. Not show us curvature. Even if straightness is provided by God and curvature is a feature of human nature, this does not mean that God's aim is to entirely replace curvature by straightness. This would destroy the disposition He created for humankind. It does mean that curvature and straightness stand together in a dialectical relationship whereby stability and change are intrinsically intertwined. This dialectical opposition between curvature and straightness allows for a limitless number of movements which humans' legislation can take, so that Islamic law remains adaptable to all times and places until the coming of the last hour. It means that God's provision of straightness allows humankind to know the utmost limits of human behavior, which humankind is not allowed to transgress. But within these extreme limits, as stated in the al-Kitab, human beings are allowed to move freely and adjust their legislation accordingly to the needs and circumstances of their time. The following examples will help us to understand how intrinsic and natural the concept of upper and lower limits is for all of us in our daily life. People live in a location in this earth which are defined by an average altitude between two extremes. Only a tiny minority dare to occupy the extreme regions of this earth, example, mountaineers and adventurers, while the majority prefer to live in the middle between the outmost limits. Number 2, daylight varies throughout the year according to season and time of the year. In some places, for example, the longest day of the year is 14 hours and 26 minutes, while the shortest day is only 9 hours and 50 minutes long. The other days of the years are in between these two extremes. Number 3, the human eye can only see colors that are visible within the spectrum of light. It cannot recognize the colors that are above violet or below red. Number 4, the human ear can only hear vibrations of sounds that are between the range of 20 to 20,000 hertz. Body temperature, heart rate, frequency of breathing through inhaling and exhaling, the movement of our limbs, and such. All these functions naturally between two extremes, and if these limits were transgressed, the body would cease to function properly. Number 5, the amount of blood sugar in our veins varies between 70 and 120 milligrams. Any amount in between the limits is normal, even if it is exactly 70 or 120 mgs. Number 6, in order to prevent dehydration, the human body needs a minimum amount of liquid per day. but there is no strict upper limits for this. Number 7, the minimum requirement for organic life is the existence of water and oxygen. These examples are sufficient to demonstrate how nature and society function between upper and lower limits, adherence to which is vital for the preservation of life. The first person in the history of Islam who recognized the significance of the Hanifiya disposition of change and non-linearity was Abraham. He followed by other prophets and messengers after him, came to believe that nothing in nature and society should be forced to become fixed and stable, since this would mean turning something into straightness, a quality that God alone can possess. To pretend straightness for something that is naturally curved is to violate Allah's unity and commit shirk Allah. That is why in verse 161 of Surah An'am, the Tawheed of Abraham's faith is contrasted to the shirk of the unbelievers. Say, verily, my Lord has guided me to a straight way that is straight, sirati al-mustaqim, a religion of right, the path trodden by Abraham, the true in faith, Hanifan, and he certainly joined not gods with God. Surah An'am, verse 161. In light of these verses, we say that Abraham's faith consisted of his belief in the Hanifiya disposition of nature, curvature, and change, and in the existence of Allah's straightness in the form of limits between which the curved progression of nature occurs. It was because of this belief and Abraham's insistence on the unity of Allah's sovereignty, al-rububiyyah, that the book told us to see him as a role model to follow. Abraham was truly an example, devoutly obedient to God and true in faith. Surah An-Nahl, verse 120. Thank you for following Theory of Limits Part 2. Part 3 is next. Let us hear your thoughts.